call it? Chord and record. Okay, now chording and recording. So last time we started our discussion about the pro and against reform. I took a against reform position. Reuven debunked my theory very brutally, so I have to go and do penitence about that.
You're just accusing me of being brutal. I'm not that brutal.
He was nice. He is very kindly, complimented my performance as
I
a
like to I like to kill people with kindness.
yeah. I like the expression. I always was a big supporter of disproportional use of force. If you do something, might as well do it full way and get it done. I guess I probably should be not an engineer, but a surgeon. Cut it, just cut it. Cut everything. So today you would like to continue evolving this idea. Reuven says he'd like to continue or change to another topic. Listen, we're completely perplexed. We're completely open to ideas.
I have nothing to say. I
Reuven, what do you think?
don't know enough about the subject to be able to have a knowledgeable opinion.
We can talk about something else. What's on our minds?
Well,
We talk about
what did you
sacrifices
want to?
this time.
Sorry, the two of you speaking, I didn't hear either of you.
Go ahead, Reuven.
No, just yeah, I'm not sure what we should talk about. I certainly have some ideas about what's driving the anger and many of the leftists. But actually,
Well,
what I'm more interested, I just read today a speech that Alexander Solzhenitsyn gave in 1983 when he won the Templeton Prize. And he traces the decline in the West, which he saw coming and getting worse, to the abandonment of God. He saw it certainly in the East, but he saw it also happening in the West. That it's a very, very interesting speech. But his main point, and one that I've come to believe, is that a liberal democracy like we have in the West really can't survive without a minimal critical mass of people who believe in God and worship God and are willing to the extent of their ability, abide by the what Solzhenitsyn called the Judeo-Christian moral values. Once people start thinking that man's the ultimate measure of everything, and that everything is materialistic and there is no God, and they rely upon science and a lot of other half-baked theories to back that up. Invariably, when the number of people who believe in God and worship Him descends to a minimum number, um, that the democracy will crumble.
Uh,
And
there has to be an addendum to that, or an amendment. I just read today. Today's the 16th. It's from yesterday's Israel National News. One of the op-ed editorialists is a non-Jewish Italian fellow called Giulio Meotti, and he's got a marvelous article about what's happening in France, where France is a Catholic country, but there are a number of towns now where the population of the Catholic schools is more than 50% Muslim, and in several schools they're almost 100%. And that
Yeah, Muslims still believe in God.
that's right. Where's the amendment for that? Where's the Muslim takeover of France, of England, of Belgium, Flanders, um, all of Europe basically? It's fallen to the sheer numbers.
Well, it's an interesting question. It seems that religious Jews and Christians certainly have a attitude that will support a secular government, but that's sustained by moral values that originate in the populace. I've sometimes wondered whether religious Muslims would be able to sustain a democracy only because Arabic Muslim culture does not really support secularism in the government. I still remember something that Al Qaeda said that when they bombed on 9/11, that we don't indeed agree with democracy because the idea of democracy is you can have whatever religion you want, and we're totally opposed to that idea. And really, without you have to have separation of church and state, except that the leftists have taken it to an extreme that they want to eliminate all discussion of religion from any public place, which is a perversion and a distortion of the idea of separation of church and state. But I'm not sure Muslims really believe in the separation of church and state. I think there are more Americanized Muslims that do believe in that, but the weight of Muslim tradition, I don't know if it would support it. So maybe I have to qualify what I said is that a liberal democracy as we've had it in the West requires both religious belief, but also a tradition that descends from the Reformation and the idea of separation of church from state. Muslims don't have that tradition. It's a very interesting discussion by Bernard Lewis. I remember who said that. Osama bin Laden said that after he bombed, that we don't believe in democracy because it supports, separation of religion. But Bernard Lewis said that one of the reasons that Islamic nations have not been able to keep up with the West is because the West went through a Reformation, which led to a bloody fighting between Catholics and Protestants for centuries. And finally, everybody just got worn out and decided, why don't we just try letting people believe what they want? I mean, one of the first places that was extensively tried was under Queen Elizabeth of England in the 1400s, where, her father, Henry VIII, had basically run around persecuting Catholics. And then her sister, Bloody Mary, went around persecuting Protestants. And she decided she'd had enough and said everybody can worship in the way they want. And during the 40 years of her reign, the total wealth of England is estimated to have increased fourfold, which seems to have been primarily from just the freedom and the ability of people simply to open their minds and be more expressive, and things just really took off. So Islam has never had that. Bernard Lewis points out that Reformation occurred, roughly 1400 years, 1500 years after the founding of the religion. But Islam started around 700, so it wouldn't be until like the 2200s or, that they would have passed a similar amount of time where they might go through their own reformation, so to speak. Um, it's an interesting issue. I don't know.
Just you mentioned Elizabeth first in the 1400s. She actually ascended the throne in 1558 and
15,
died
yeah,
in
right. Thank you.
1603.
Yeah, I'm confusing. First, yeah, the that's true. The expulsion of the Jews came first. Elizabeth came after that. You're right.
Yeah.
And
Um,
actually, yeah, it was about 90 years later. When was the Spanish Armada was defeated? Roughly 90 years, like 1570, 1580, something.
Yeah.
wow. You've got a good memory.
No, my
Um,
memory is terrible. I actually have to look it up. Uh,
anyway,
that's why I couldn't.
while you're looking that up, and we're talking about church and state, uh, it was interesting to. I wanted to find the population of Carmiel, which is
1588. Yeah, 1588 is the Spanish Armada.
yeah. So that's 30 years after Elizabeth I came to power. Um, it changes the subject a little bit, but it still has to do with church and state, and if the citizens of a country, um, and how many rights they have. I was looking up the population of Carmiel, which is one of the largest cities in the Galilee, the Western Galilee, over 50,000 people now. I was looking to see whether there was any plans to put a hospital in there. But I looked up Carmiel on Wikipedia, and it waxed poetic about how the city, the real estate for the city was grabbed and expropriated from the Arab towns around it, and how Arabs were not allowed to come live in Carmiel when it was first started because that's not what Carmiel was designed for. It attained the status of a development town in order to get government grants and all sorts of stuff, primarily about how racist Carmiel is because it was built on the idea that this is a town for Jews. Of course, in the more recent past, more and more Arabs have moved into Carmiel, just as they have moved into Nahariya and into Ma'alot, and we don't yet have a mosque in our area of Nahariya, but it seems to be almost only a matter of time until we do. Certainly, we can hear the muezzin from across the highway. Just the question about when you look at things from the other side, from the Arab point of view, and I say that with a little bit of a shudder. If we're separating church and state, or synagogue and state, or mosque and state, how do we define ourselves in Israel? I accept that you're joining us from the US, so it's not completely your discussion. But given what's happened in Europe, I don't know. We might have Muslim cities in the U.S. in the not distant future. And what's going to happen with with our just because of demographics? We already have the squad elected representatives of the people sitting in Washington, and look what joy they're bringing the rest of the country.
It's interesting. It's Bernard Russell, Bertram Russell, wrote an interesting piece about Islam and Marxism. And he said that there's a surprising amount of um, shared, certain type of shared values between them, that both of them believe that the government should control everything about a person's life. The government in Islam being an Islamic theocracy, so to speak, which controls how people think, is one state religion. And in the sense, Marxism is also a state religion. Um, and this one writer I remember from Egypt, I don't remember the exact words, but basically, she was amazed that when Nasser was in power and they were looking towards Russia and Russian socialism, how many intellectuals had flipped and become, Marxists. She said even though they really didn't know what the hell they were talking about, they didn't have the depth of the concept, but they were parroting a lot of these ideas. And then when it flipped and the more Islamic Brotherhood type government took over, they immediately flipped back to being Islamists. It's like without missing a beat. Um, she found that surprising, but according to the way Bertrand Russell explained, Bertrand Russell, um, there's a lot of similarity in that um, for many people in Islam, what is true is what you're supposed to believe. The idea of independent or absolute truth doesn't really exist for many of them. Remember people who had interviewed people who worked for Saddam Hussein in some of their gas plants and the poison plants. They were interviewed, interrogated by U.S. interrogators, and they had a picture taken of these guys posing in front of the plant, like a group portrait. And they said, "You work here?" And they said, "No, I don't work there." And he showed them the picture of him in front of these people in front of the plants, and they all said, "Oh no, it's not me." In other words, what they're supposed to say, that was the truth. And they did lie detector tests on them, and they said it was indistinguishable from the truth. They didn't show any signs on the lie detector of being lying. So in other words, psychologically, they had no trouble just saying what they were supposed to say. And they didn't register in their minds as lies. It still represented the truth to them. So I think that's something that's just characteristic of many in the Islamic mind. It's they tend to think more tribally and more group oriented, and the idea of the more American independent thinking, it's just not a concept. I don't know how that would play out. What would increasing Muslim population also lead to decline? I think one of the reasons people that are always supporting Muslims in the United States, and always, anytime you attack Muslims' ideas or behaviors, you're called a racist.
Islamophobe, yeah.
Islamophobe, yeah. A lot of that has to do with a shared distaste for the American capitalist system. And it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend idea. And I think leftists, in their deluded minds, think that ultimately Islamists will become their friends and will come over to the leftist way of thinking, which it'll actually be the other side. The leftists will be taken over and forced to convert by the Muslims if it ever comes to that.
I think it's more like an ethnical thing personally, because I think what happens you just mentioned, it took 1400 years for the Reformation. I have a feeling that I mean, when I travel all over Arab world, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and whatnot, and I also see secularizations of the Arab societies. I mean, even Iran is losing grip on their religious state imposed principles. A lot of people are more liberal. The only country in the world really that goes strictly by religion is probably Afghanistan right now. Everybody else. So I think it seems to me that Iran, that the Arab world, and the reason why they are so close together, I think ethnically, because when Arab communities in somewhere in France or in America, they stick together, just like Jews come to America. And I mean, I know many Jews in America and Chabad. They come to Chabad not because of religious reason, because listen, I came from Tel Aviv to Atlanta somewhere, and after 2 weeks, let's see, is there any other Israelis around? Well, they go to Chabad. So they hang out there because of the cultural affiliation and not necessarily religious affiliation. So I think it's continuously, it has to come to the point that more and more. Listen, look at Israel. The left tendency basically is minority. I mean, it's minority rules a lot of Israel. A lot of rules are made, even American ideas about essentially the generational society values penetrates into Israel as well. But a majority of people in Israel, I would say 80% probably still like traditional values. It doesn't mean that they're ready to go to the synagogue for Shachrit, Mincha, and Arvit, but they stay. The guy comes into the mall and touches mezuzah. Then comes without kippah, touches mezuzah, comes in and drives to the beach on Shabbat. And on the beach, he still has bracha before he drinks a glass of coffee.
And that book you gave me, I don't remember, but yeah, I think it was about 20% of Israelis are just completely atheistic. But a large number are sort of traditionalists. They still like to have Shabbat or Pesach.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the Arab world the same. I think if you go to Riyadh, you'll see
well,
people.
The thing is,
they drink.
There's a difference. Iran. I think there's definitely a strong element in Iran that wants to be more secular, but they've been suppressed a lot by the leaders. But I think when you go to countries like Iraq, Syria, even Egypt, it's much less strong there. I remember an interview with a CIA guy after the so-called Arab Spring, and they asked him, because he had been analyzing the Arabs for a long time. They asked him what he thought about the Arab Spring. He said it's not gonna turn out to be very much. I said, why not? He said, well, it took about 700-800 years for England to go from a feudal society to democracy. And the West only penetrated the Arab world around 1812 when Napoleon invaded. And they haven't had that long, to try to digest these ideas. He says, in the end, they're going to fall back on what they feel comfortable with, and what they feel comfortable with is religion, and that's where they're going to go when this whole thing settles down. That's pretty much where things have gone. It's, they do want things the West has to offer. There's a very good book I read by Fouad Ajami called "The Dream Palace of the Arab Mind." The Arab Mind, the Dream Palace of the Arabs. Yeah, A Generation's Odyssey. A Dream Palace of the Arabs. And there was one key point in there he made. He said that one thing, because he grew up in Lebanon, he's actually very anti-Israel when he started out. What changed his mind, after becoming somewhat radical Islamist, was his mother became ill and she was taken into Israeli hospital and cured. And that, he suddenly realized, all these, propaganda he'd been told really wasn't true. But he said there's two things that the Arabs are obsessed with referred to the West. It's Western culture is one, and the second they call the machine. And they both make the Arabs crazy. They make them embarrassed, ashamed, frustrated, confused, because they want what the machine can give them, modernity and the benefits of having machines with technology. But they find it very distressing and has a disturbing effect on their culture, and they have trouble mastering it. And of course, Western culture they find unsavory. An Arab culture, there's a distinct hierarchy. Father rules over the mother, who rules over the children, and the local boss rules over you, and his boss rules over him. And the idea of everybody just being his own boss is like destructive of the very family structure and the very value. So these two things, the machine and Western culture, are just big pills they can't swallow. And as much as they want to secularize, I would say it's based on what I've read, it's more that they want the benefits of Western technology, but they find the process that will allow them to do R&D, research and development, and master it at the same time may disrupt the fabric of their own societies, and they're very hesitant about it. And I think like the Arab Spring, yeah, you hear little whisperings about it, but I think in the end they're going to find it's going to be too much of a conflict with their culture, and there's just going to be a tension that won't go away.
It's probably just a reflection of human nature, you know. Just we all want to have a comfortable living.
But we're talking about Arabs or Muslims in other cultures, and I had a lot of respect for the Australian government when they simply said, if you don't like it, you can feel free to leave. But Australia is a Christian country, and we are going to have the cross on government lawns, and don't try to tell us we can't. So
well, that's courageous, but that's because they still have a sense of attachment to their religious faith and they appreciate it. I think there's few other countries in the world who have been Christian democracies that still have that. England, as far as towards the Muslims, has just fallen apart. They, most of the government has just been
because Australia is so far. I mean, it's like an island. I was in Australia. I find that Australia. I mean, I was there maybe like 10 years ago, and I thought that time, let's say it was year 2000, I forget, and I thought I'm looking at 1950s in U.S. Slow, no rush, they're like this, and so it's like separated. So they're not affected, and we Europe live here basically affected. I mean, it's all over. Denmark here, and Sweden here, and Germany here, and Russia here, and everywhere is completely different and shoving and pushing. So people end up reacting to that, and they want to quickly. We have a quick speed of tempo of life. It's quick. Come on, let's build this highway. Let's get another high rise. Let's get another cell tower. Australians like la'at, like we say in Israel. So they maintain that no need
laid
for
back,
this.
man.
Yeah. And I think that's why. New Zealand also, I was in New Zealand, it's like paradise. People just 9 o'clock, maybe I'll go to work to go.
Easy going, yeah.
Yeah, very easy going. And that's what it is.
Well, yeah, I lived in Australia for 4 years in the 60s, and I went back for several months in the late 80s. And I can agree with you. I saw huge changes between the 60s and the 80s. In the 60s, the amount of racism against Asians was phenomenal. I had an Australian-born Chinese friend in school, and he had to put up with no end of racial remarks, and it wasn't just mean, it was very destructive. And by the time I was there in the late 80s, the Australians were so far up the bums of Japan, because Japan had the stuff that Australia wanted in terms of consumerism. They changed their tune quite radically, as relaxed as they were. So that's why this is only a few years ago. I mean, I know what you're saying, but I still think that as easygoing as Australians were, that was a very non-easygoing thing to say on the part of a prime minister. And I don't know where the situation is now. In terms of New Zealand is a very poor country. I have a friend who is a vascular surgeon, and he went down there when he finished his residency in the early 80s. And when I talked to him, he said he was unable to leave New Zealand because he couldn't afford to. As a vascular surgeon, working in hospitals, working in private practice, working full time. I don't know how many sheep he had to treat, but because there's more sheep than people in New Zealand. But it's a very poor country. So I don't know how many Muslims want to live there. I don't know how many Jews want to live there.
I tell about New Zealand interestingly because my cousin's kids live in New Zealand. They're Israelis. I think they're even born here. And they went there, and I learned because when I was in New Zealand, I thought that's what Jurassic Park was filmed, and it's just like paradise. You're driving, especially Southern Island, and you hear these trees. It's beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous, like quiet and beautiful country. But they say that agriculture non-existent. He said they buy peppers in the store by pieces. Give me 3 peppers, 2 peppers, like that. The ground, for some reason, is very good to produce all these trees, green, and wheat and apples and pears doesn't grow there. I mean, I just recently learned that.
Does not grow in New Zealand?
No, they have a mostly what do you call it? They have sheep and goats. That's a lot of meat eaters.
They don't have good topsoil.
Yeah, but I never knew that. I thought in Israel we grow wheat and all. You would think in Israel, contrary. In Israel you have sheep and goats and nothing grows because it's a desert. But yet Israel, it's in Solomon's times, it was a supply of wheat to the entire world. And New Zealand, you would think the other way around. It turned out to be completely nothing. I just couldn't believe it. When I was there like a couple of weeks. I never paid attention to that, but that's what they said.
Yeah, it's probably a soil problem. It's I've seen like at least one geologist hypothesize one of the reasons Germany was always making war on its neighbors is that the soil was somewhat poor. And the neighboring countries had better soil and better, easier to grow crops.
Let me mention something interesting because it's an interesting subject we touched on, but we have 7 minutes left. I had a really interesting just an hour ago. We had a very interesting debate with my wife, and I think she wanted. I was thinking because I always was telling my wife that I was worried about for American Jews because assimilation. Statistically, assimilation in America is like 60, let's say 70%, probably 65%, something like that. 70%. So if you look at that statistically, 70%, it's a couple of generations, 2, 3, 4 generations. Just look at the numbers, it will be 0. They'll probably remain ultra-Orthodox in Muncie, in Crown Heights, Chabad, and very small fraction. Everybody else will be gone. And my wife brought an interesting point. She said, no, she doesn't think so. Yes, she said, there's a Jews in America, in New York, that walking around eating cheeseburgers and ham and bacon and all that, and yet they still will marry Jews. So now we have a generation. They can completely non-religious. The guy doesn't know when last time he was a synagogue. Yom Kippur? What Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur? I don't know when. What is Yom Kippur? Oh, we passed it already. Interesting. And yet they still marry a Jew. So, and I never thought about this. So somehow, can the generations persist to be Jewish without no affiliation with the synagogue, with no knowing prayers, no histories? My wife said it's possible. There'll still something inside innately will maintain them to marry Jews. So I don't know. When I tell her where's the 70% rate of assimilation comes from, she says, well, yeah, some marry, but a certain group still remain. They all marry Jews.
I disagree. I come from Vancouver, where the assimilation rate is 80% or more. And that means those people are lost to Judaism. And until another Holocaust comes along and they are told who they are, they have no identification.
Elaine, you want to mention to our group why you think the Jews will not disappear in America? Honey.
There are less than
Elaine,
2,000
come here.
Jews living in New Zealand.
Just put your hat on. Just a minute.
Put your hat on.
Honey, you want to mention? Come mention because I have like 3 minutes.
I'll put my hat on.
To say why Jews in America will not disappear. It's interesting. Don't say come.
I don't know why. What am I going to tell people?
Your view.
The view is that they won't.
Okay, I want to listen. Come. Only have 3 minutes, Helen.
Yeah, but I'm not interested. Why do you do this to me?
Oh, you don't want to? No. Honey. Here, my
I
wife
need to
just.
look. I don't need. They didn't need to see me. I
Okay.
can talk.
All right, she will talk, but she doesn't want to be seen. Go ahead, Jonathan. You just said that American Jews, Canadian Jews, will assimilate and eventually disappear. Well, my wife is saying even though they eat ham and everything else, and well, but they still marry Jews. They still remain. She says she doesn't believe in statistics. Go ahead, honey. Make your point.
I don't think they'll disappear. And the reason I don't think they'll disappear is because as much as we feel like they're assimilated, they don't know much about Torah, they don't do anything about Shabbos, they eat pork, they whatever. But many of them are like that. They go to Reform shuls, they still marry Jews. There's something there that makes them marry Jews. Other Jews that don't do Torah and don't whatever. And I do believe that through doing that and marrying Jews, whether they're, even though not observant, they're not going to assimilate. They're not going to assimilate. They're going to stay Jews. What does it mean to be a Jew? Does it mean that you have to keep Shabbos? Does it mean you have to know Torah? Or does it mean that you know you have to marry Jews and it's not that you only have to marry Jews, but that's your connection. You just feel that connection. Whether they're eating pork or not keeping Shabbos, there's some connection there that it's Jewish.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
And so from having that, going from there, you never know from going from there where the connection of coming closer to tshuva, to becoming more observant will happen. If they don't at all think about marrying Jews, I mean, they're gone. But I don't think American Jews are like that. I think what we see in front of us is not really what we get a lot of times. Even though they look like they're not Jews, they don't care about Judaism, they don't want to, they're going to marry a Jew. And it's just because of that.
Can I hear you, Jonathan?
Now can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
What happened?
Can you hear me now? Reuven, can you hear me? Just nod. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Got a minute and 30 seconds.
30 seconds left.
What happened to my
1 minute, 30 seconds.
They probably couldn't hear me.
Did he hear Helene?
Yeah, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Hello?
Because you probably didn't take it.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, here, put the phone.
I can hear you.
Why can't we?
Go ahead. Okay. She can hear on the phone.
But Lev can't hear us now.
Well, I don't know how it gets turned on so that everyone can.
Keep talking. We'll have a minute.
Yeah. We are less than a minute. Oh, it was just that the new religion of the left is the left is a religion of its own, and I think that's overtaken Judaism for a lot of people who are liberal Jews. They're now leftist Jews, and their religion is the left, and they're against Israel. And I think that is where we're going to see them disappear.
Okay, maybe he's right. If they're against Israel, then they're gone. If they're against Israel,
she said, maybe you're right. If they're against Israel, that's right. Maybe next week we can continue on that topic. That's interesting because I was thinking that I couldn't really argue with my wife on that because I always thought that she was wrong on this. I was right, but today I wasn't sure. All right, guys. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.